Okay, that's recorded.
That's me though. Let me check really quick to make sure they're all good.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're live. We're good.
Okay. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the October 12th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're continuing to use as our community recovers from the COVID-19 pandemic. This format enables the Planning Commission to meet here from the community and take care of our business while keeping members, the staff, and the public safe. Today, our meeting will begin with public comment, followed by a work session on the Middle Housing Project. There are a few housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format that I need to take care of first, and thank you for your patience while I work through these. Anyone wishing to access this meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by following the access instructions listed on the agenda for the meeting. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and you haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speakers queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, a laptop, or other device, click once on the blue hand icon. And for those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. When the public comment begins, our meeting moderator will announce the next two speakers at a time, and when it's your turn, the moderator will announce your name and unmute your microphone. Public comment overall is limited to 10 minutes, so your time to speak will be based on the number of people that are signed up to speak. Please feel free to contact staff if there is testimony you were not able to provide, or if you wish to get to us in a different manner. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and move to agenda item A, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Planning Commission on any topics except for items scheduled for public hearing or public hearing items for which the record is already closed. So I guess I would just check with staff now and see if is there anyone that's on this wishing to provide comment.
Not at this time, no hands are raised.
Okay. Okay, so I'll close the public comment. I think what we'll do at this point, I neglected to say at the start, I think Alyssa said it and maybe everyone heard, but Commissioner Taylor is absent tonight. So I'll just make that note for the record. So I think what we'll do now is move on to agenda item B, which is the work session on Middle Housing Code amendments, and I'll turn it over to Terry Harding.
Thanks, Commissioner Basin. Bear with me while I share my screen. All right. So good evening. We're going to be talking about the Middle Housing Code Amendments project tonight, giving you an update on several items. We'll talk about the project goals like we always do, give you a schedule update, and then dive into a couple of hot topics that we've been hearing from the public about, and also that we want to highlight for you in the information leading up to your public hearing. So middle housing summary info, we'll talk about each of the housing types, and Sophie will walk us through those. Then we'll talk about the affordability frequently asked questions that's attached to your packet. We'll have a look at a brand new map that we'll be publishing on our website very soon that shows the lot sizes that are in the recommended code. And then we'll look at some frequent transit map options for an incentive that the Planning Commission has discussed about reducing parking or eliminating parking requirements for middle housing near transit. And then we'll wrap up with next steps. So first, I just want to remind you about the overarching goals for this project. They are to comply with the House bill, first and foremost, then further ongoing work aimed at addressing equity and affordability, and lastly, to enable more production of diverse types of housing across Eugene. As a reminder, strong themes emerged from the outreach done with different groups and the general public. That outreach process is summarized in your agenda packet, and the 4 themes here on your screen include a focus on equity and inclusion as code choices are made, encourage and incentivize middle housing across the community, near transit routes, encourage compact development by reducing parking requirements, and pursue incentives and programs beyond the code as part of our ongoing housing work. And I'll just note that tomorrow, October 13th, the City Council will be having a work session on the housing implementation pipeline. So that's very related to this work, and you might check that out when you have time. And now I'm going to throw it over to Jeff to give you a schedule update.
Yeah, so thanks, Terry. I'm here to give you some bad news and good news. As you know, in addition to all the public outreach that we've done leading up to our formal adoption process, we do have some procedural notice requirements. And one of those is for a legal ad to be posted in the Register Guard. That did not happen to give people adequate time and notice through that process. And so staff has chosen to, in order to make sure that we're both procedurally correct, but also to give people the opportunity to digest the 124-page code amendment that we put out there, we're going to have to postpone our public hearing. So we were previously scheduled for October 26th. We have to have, we're going to have to re-notice. So that means sending out new mailed notice and make sure that that notice gets posted to the Register Guard and get confirmation from them that it's going up there. And so we're looking at November 16th as our new hearing date. So the bad news is that the Register Guard didn't post our legal notice. The good news is that it gives the public and planning commissioners a little bit more time to digest that really big package of code amendments that was brought forward. So we will be providing an update at the end of this with kind of what that does to our dates moving forward and some of the opportunity for info sessions and things like that. But that's the silver lining is that everybody gets a little more time to look at the code before we go to the Planning Commission public hearing. So any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Can't see everyone, so just let me know if there are questions. Okay, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, as Jeff said, we have some kind of updated next step dates at the very end of the presentation, but before we get there, we're gonna go over to Sophie, who's going to walk us through the summary of our outreach to date and then our summary info about the housing types. Sophie.
Thanks, Terry, and hello, commissioners. This is a graphic that was attached to your packet. I suggest zooming into it on a PDF. It's also posted on our website with the ability to zoom into it. This is made by Jennifer Knapp, and it's just a summary of all of the work that we've done so far, which you're very familiar with already. The top highlights the demographics of our survey responses, and the bottom highlights the demographics of our groups that we pulled together, including the Healthy Democracy Panel, Equity Roundtable, Boards and Commissions Roundtable, Local Partners Roundtable, Developer Focus Group, and Student Outreach, as well as our social media outreach. There is one number that's incorrect now, which is at the bottom. It says we've had 17 Planning Commission and City Council updates, and as of right now, that's 19, and we'll just continue to grow. So just showing off what we've done so far, and that's available for the public and will be posted on our social media soon. I think we can go ahead. One other thing we're making for public engagement is going to be a handy guide to the adoption process so that folks know how to get involved with the public hearings process. Included in that will be a bunch of summary tables. We tried to just make one, but you can only have so many asterisks on one sheet of paper. So we expanded it to a 6-page document, which is very exciting. And we're going to give you a preview of that tonight. What we're going to show you tonight is pending legal review. And so please don't hold us to it. It will be checked by our legal team and it'll be shared shortly so that folks can get involved with the process. So I'll walk through that now. So this is a summary of our duplex standards. On the left are the minimum standards as based on standards that apply to single detached dwellings in the same zone. And so for all intents and purposes, these are based on the R1 zone where the majority of changes are occurring. A highlight here is that even though we only have to allow duplexes on all lots that allow single detached units, we've proposed a smaller lot size or smaller minimum lot size than what is currently required for single detached units. And all of the lot sizes that I'll point out in this summary don't include the provision to reduce minimum lot size by 25% if all of the dwelling units are under 900 square feet each. So just a little caveat there. There's a lot of caveats, as I mentioned, asterisks. With minimum front yard setbacks, those generally just match, all of the setbacks match those that apply to single detached units. There's an increased height by 5 feet that's proposed for duplexes. We're keeping the minimum parking at 1 space per dwelling, but I'll get to those caveats in a bit. And no design standards and increasing lot coverage to 75% of the lot. And Terry, did you want me to stop for questions on each housing type or just move through?
I don't think so, but I do want you to say a bit about where the proposed code standards lie on the allow, encourage, or incentivize spectrum.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
Great. So I would say that the minimum lot size would be encourage, and then with the provision of reducing the minimum lot size if there are small units, that would be more incentivize. The maximum height, I think, would be encourage. Setbacks would be allow. Parking would be allow here on this summary, but then if it takes advantage of the small dwellings or proximity to transit, then it would be incentivize. There's not really an encourage spot with parking. You either do it or you don't. And then maximum lot coverage, I would say, is encourage.
Thank you. I just wanted to point that out because it is complicated and there are a lot of standards and there really is a mixture. But overall, the Planning Commission's direction to us over the spring and summer discussion of the code was to follow the outreach results, which were to land somewhere between encourage and incentivize for the majority of our standards. And where we instead recommend allow, we try to call that out for you. So that's just a little bit more about that. And I would just say one more thing before letting you continue, Sophie, and that is if commissioners have any advice to us on how to reflect that in the materials that go out to the public, we'd love to hear what your advice is. We have had requests from folks to let us know where the recommendations land, including from the commission. And so as we put these tables together, we recognized it was difficult to make a broad brush indication. And instead, we need to just provide the comparison and allow folks to see how it's different. I hope that makes sense. Okay,
Thank you,
and
Terry.
so after we go through all of the types, maybe we can break for questions.
Great. I would say in general, the allow is really with the design standards, and then parking for larger unit sizes and further distance from transit. And then everything else is kind of encouraged, incentivized. Moving on to triplex standards. As you also know, triplex and fourplex standards, some of them are based off of the standards that apply to single detached dwellings, and others are based off of other standards that come from the minimum standards. So we try to point that out where we can. So we'll start with minimum lot size. The state says that we may not require a larger minimum lot size than 5,000 square feet. And we're proposing 3,500 square feet for triplexes. Again, setbacks match those that apply to single detached in the same zone. Similar to duplex, there's an increased height allowance. Minimum parking, this comes straight from the standards from the state, depend on the lot size. So this will be the same for triplexes and fourplexes, but the same parking reductions that I'll mention later will apply here. So it's either depends on lot size, proximity to transit, or dwelling size. And then design standards, we're just using those that apply in the model code. So the minimum standard is that we can't have stricter design standards than those in the model code, and it was kind of hard to put in a table. So this, we just pointed out exactly what they are, which is entry orientation standards, window coverage, garage width, and off-street parking areas, as well as driveway approaches. And then lastly, we have the increase in maximum lot coverage. Fourplexes are going to look really similar to triplexes, except for a slightly larger minimum lot size at 4,500 square feet. Again, the setbacks are the exact same as those that apply to single detached units. A slight increase in height, minimum parking based off of the minimum standards. The same design standards that apply to triplexes that are directly from the model code, and an increase in maximum lot coverage. And then things get a little different with row houses. So there is no proposed minimum lot size, and this is because the density requirements and lot coverage and all of the other standards that we're regulating will kind of control that. The setbacks are 10 feet or 18 feet for garage doors, which is the exact same as single detached units. The height, similar to duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, is 35 feet. Minimum parking is no more than one space per dwelling. There will be those parking reduction opportunities. And then the design standards are the same as those in the model code. Then we have our cottage cluster standards. So there's a reduction in the minimum lot size to 3,500 square feet. The setbacks are the same as single detached units, but different than single detached units is that there must be a minimum of 6 feet between cottages. This came from the minimum standards from the state. Maximum height is shorter than single detached units because cottage clusters have their size limitations. So that's at 25 feet. Minimum parking is one space per dwelling. And then the design standards for cottage clusters are pretty specified and laid out in the minimum standards in the model code. So they include things like cottage orientation and common courtyard design standards. Commissioner Edwards, did you have a question on this slide?
You know, I just had a quick question, Sophie, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but the provisions that will allow, eventually allow us to divide middle housing into smaller lots for, that came out of the latest legislative session. Are those minimum standards? Do those have minimum standards that would then also apply, or do you understand my question? Sorry.
Yes, so Senate Bill
Okay.
458, and this,
Yeah.
Lauren, please jump in if I say something incorrect. Senate Bill 458 has specific provisions. So there has to be, for example, shared easements for parking and pedestrian access.
Okay.
There has to be 1 unit per middle housing lot. And so that interferes with, stacked plexes using Senate Bill 458 lot division.
Right.
Then there has to be things like, I'm just gonna defer to Lauren here because I am so afraid of getting this wrong. But yes, there are specific provisions in Senate Bill 458 that specify exactly how it should be executed.
But sorry, Sophie. But specific to the minimum lot sizes, would those still have to apply?
I'm happy to jump in here. Just gonna say that if you imagine it as the parent lot is kind of the lot before it's divided into middle housing, that has to meet all of our lot standards.
Okay.
And then the middle housing lots that are created within the parent lot, those do not have a minimum lot size. They don't necessarily have to have frontage, et cetera.
Okay.
But that parent lot still has to meet those standards.
That is super helpful. I appreciate it. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, the new lots don't become their own like single detached lots. They'll always be middle housing lots. I think we have a graphic somewhere that would maybe be helpful to share. Okay, I think I'm finished with the cottage cluster slide.
Yeah, and that is the last slide on the housing types. So if any other commissioners have questions about this information or suggestions for how we might present this in our online guide, now would be a great time. Commissioner Ramey.
Yeah, this is helpful. I think this is headed the right direction. I did have a question about minimum standard, that column. I'm not sure I followed exactly what that was. And my question is more directly about, is that what we get as a code if we don't do anything? In other words, if we weren't going through this process, the House Bill 2001 says, well, if you don't do anything, this is what you get. And is that what that column is?
Not necessarily. If we don't comply with House Bill 2001 by June 30th, 2022, the model code will apply. The model code meets the minimum standards and is fairly similar to the minimum standards, but is not exactly the minimum standards. So there are instances where it goes further than the minimum standards, but it's very similar to the allow option. So that column is if we were to just meet the minimum standards as the R1, based off of the R1 standards currently.
So could that say that's the minimum standard to become compliant with House Bill 2001?
Correct.
Because I think somehow for me, that's a little easier. Minimum sounds like, oh, we'll just go back to maybe that's what we already have, or I don't know where that came from. So I think that would be easier for me to understand.
Thanks, that's really good feedback. Commissioner Beeson?
I guess well, let me just confirm with you, when you talk about the minimum standard, that's the Oregon administrative rule, right?
Yes.
Okay. And wouldn't suggest that you relabel anything, but that's sort of the guardrail or the minimum, however you want to describe it, depending on the category. I've said this a couple of times. I like very much that we're doing this. I like the way that you're putting it together. I think it'll end up, as we go through all the discussions and public hearing and so on, I think it will, and on into review with the council, I think it will be very helpful. It's interesting to me when you look at it, many of the categories, there really isn't any difference between what we're doing and what the minimum is. I think that's worth noting. This is my own personal perception, but I think when you go through it and you look at it, I don't see that anything that's being proposed here is what I'd call radical or, substantially different. 35-foot height as opposed to 30-foot height, something people will certainly want to discuss, but it's a relatively minor thing. I also think and when we talk about it, and I'll try to give you some feedback on it, I just want to kind of think about it, but the idea of talking about it in terms of allow and encourage and incentivize, I think is good. I've kind of, over the months we've been doing this, I've been thinking about it. We're trying to be more flexible. We're trying to put flexibility into this thing as opposed to just staying with the minimum. And we've talked about a number of reasons why we're doing that, but not least of which is that the idea that it'll probably allow for development of more affordable housing. And so many of these, and I think when we talk about it and we take the improvement package forward, if we can, really stress that on the land use code amendments we're doing, what we are doing to encourage affordability, to really call that out. And maybe it's obvious to some people. I'm not sure it will be all the way through. And I think it'd be good to kind of call that out and say, this is what we're doing, particularly in the land use code amendments we're proposing that would encourage affordability. So those are a couple of comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Fragala?
Yeah, so you asked the question about how to identify the encourage, allow, and incentivize. And, I really like visual aids, and I think you could put some kind of, I guess I shouldn't use the word emoji, but some kind of icon. That's the correct word, though. There might be some fun emojis out there you could use. I would like if you went with that idea, I would like for the definitions of the encourage, incentivize to include the manner in which you described it, that they are defined by the outreach results that we received, so that the encourage and incentivize reflect the input from the public community about wanting to see these options encouraged or incentivized.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands right now, and our next topic is the affordability strategies. So Commissioner Beeson, some of the things you just asked about is our next topic. So I'll move on into that unless I see anybody raise their hand real quickly. Okay. So attached to your packet, there is a 2-pager. Also tried to get this one on 1 page, didn't quite work. But a 2-page memo that answers frequently asked questions about middle housing and affordability. So I just put some of the major questions, question 1 and 2, on these slides so we could talk through them in this format, and the public could also listen. But the complete FAQ is attached to your packet and will be part of our guide to the adoption package that we're going to be publishing shortly. So the first question is, can the city require that new middle housing units be affordable to people in certain income ranges? And the answer is that state law does not allow jurisdictions to require all new middle housing to be affordable at a specific income level. We talked about this at our last meeting, and there's a longer answer in your attachment, but this is the basic answer. So instead, we have question 2. Are there ways for the city to provide incentives or other strategies to make middle housing more affordable? And the answer to that question is yes. The city has discussed and is considering several options for encouraging or incentivizing development of middle housing that would be affordable to a wider range of residents. And here are some of those things. Thank you for the comment about pointing people to these in the code. This is directly from the memo, but we can think about how else to highlight this information for people. So some of the strategies are to allow for development of middle housing with smaller lot sizes and or more units on each lot to reduce land cost per unit. Offer a density bonus if property owners want to keep some units affordable to people earning limited incomes. Thirdly, encourage smaller middle housing unit sizes by reducing lot area requirements and eliminating off-street parking mandates when units are smaller than 900 square feet. And the fourth one, reduce city fees, property taxes, and or the cost of associated public facilities for middle housing units that are affordable to people with lower incomes. And that relates to things that we've talked about doing outside of the code, but within a parallel process, such as the housing implementation pipeline. Okay, so before we go on to lot sizes, we have opportunity for questions. Commissioner Fiorelli.
Thank you, Terry. I wanted to touch base on two of these that stand out to me, and I think there might be an argument for others as well. But when we're looking specifically at the reduced city fees, property taxes, as well as the density bonuses, I'm curious, are there thoughts around time requirements similar to what some federal funding mechanisms apply? What sort of time frame has staff discussed if they're looking at that? And or is there a consideration for something along the line of community benefit agreements or other things that are absolutely within, I believe, the scope and the realm of what we're able to do, but to introduce to make sure that those units stay affordable over the long term? I think that's my primary concern here.
Great, thank you for the question. We have been talking with our team, our project team, consultants, and our community development housing staff about what would make sense. We're still in the process of landing on a staff recommendation that then we would take to property owners and developers and affordable housing developers in particular to get their feedback on. But what's been tossed around at this early stage is somewhere in the realm of a 10-year time requirement for affordability requirements to run with the land. Some federal programs require more, as some tax exemptions are for less of a period of time, and so somewhere in that range is what's been thrown out there. Commissioner Edwards.
I unmute. Oh, thanks, Terry. So this is great information. I think one of the arguments that I think we've all seen in some of the correspondence and whatnot is, that middle housing as new construction isn't affordable because, costs are so high and land and everything else. And so almost as if therefore we shouldn't do it. And I mean, in my opinion, I don't want us to get high centered on having to build in all of these incentives, because I actually do believe that the whole, part of the way that we address this crisis is through supply. And the more supply that we can build and the more diversity of housing types. And, as mentioned on the slide, there are certainly a number of things that organically would help to bring the costs down, as opposed to, for example, a single unit house. And so I do think that, while it's important, and I do want us to see and get creative with incentives and ways that developers can offer these units at a lower price point. I think that organically, like I said, the supply and demand issue starts to kind of address that, but also, these are ownership opportunities, which we just don't have in our community right now. And that's ways for people to start building equity that maybe couldn't otherwise. And so I just want to caution us to be, mindful, but not get high centered on having to build in all of these things as if it's not worth it if we can't do that. I mean, this whole process is a very worthy process. And I just don't want us to see ourselves getting kind of sucked into the narrative of, well, it's not really going to be affordable, so therefore we shouldn't do it, because we should, be more mindful of that. So that's what I wanted to say. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll just note that some of your statements do come up in some of the later questions and FAQs, so give the whole thing a read, point people to it. We definitely have heard those things from the project team. And we'll go to Commissioner Isaacson.
Thank you. I hope this isn't too lengthy. I've been struggling with my own personal story in this because I have a direct connection, I think, to a lot of what we're talking about. And I take exception to some of the correspondence that suggests that this doesn't work because I'm a living proof, and a lot of my friends who did the same type of project are as well. For brevity, I did everything that you would expect someone to do. I went to college, I went to master's, graduated at the top of my class, did everything you wanted to do, and then the economy went south in 2019. And the only thing that saved me was the fact that I bought a house that could be converted into a duplex. I put a lot of sweat equity into it to build it up. I created equity for myself. I rented that place out, had great friends that I still have friendships with. And the income that property gave me is a direct line to where I am now. And every blessing that I have as a result of that, you can tie back to that one singular moment. And the only reason I was able to qualify for that house was because of a government program, the first home buyer tax credit that allowed me to have access to that. So I personally think that the issue of ADUs, the issue of adding inventory, the discussion around that are great from a developer, private enterprise, private sector solution. But I don't think that the housing crisis is going to be solved by a private sector alone solution. I think this is a big enough one that the public sector, the government's gonna have to come and step in. And so having these conversations about what we can do to reduce freeze when you talk to developers about why they won't build in Eugene or why it's reluctant to build in Eugene because of the costs that are associated with it. It doesn't have to be a permanent plan, but if we can have a conversation about waving a big stick to do a 3-year moratorium or 3-year drastic reduction in the fees and taxes associated with it to drive that development in there. And I get that there's going to be arguments about a gift to the developers, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to build these things. And it's also a job incubator for folks who have to actually go out there and build it for our trade community. So I wrestle with that because I think that is part of the solution that we need to have a conversation with. So I'm really glad that it is part of today's discussion. I just wanted to put it out there.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands. I'll go back to our remaining topics. Okay, so this is a new map. And so I don't expect you to be able to really rate it on the screen today, but I wanted to show it to you because we created this to reflect the recommendations in the draft code. So there's new categories of lot size on this map, down to 2,250 square feet, which is our recommendation for a new duplex lot. And those are shown in red. And then the next category, 2,250 up to 3,500 is in peach. The next category up is in blue, and then the biggest lots are in the green. And so the green lots covering most of the city, as you can see on this map, would allow all of the middle housing types. And that is a reflection of the direction of the minimum standards and also of the Planning Commission and our results of the public outreach to really encourage and incentivize middle housing across the community. That's the visual representation at the citywide scale of what lots would be eligible for all middle housing types in our community. And then as you go down in lot size, fewer types are available to you, and you have to check the tables to see what rules apply. But this will be an online map that's zoomable, and you can zoom in, check out your neighborhood, see what size the current lots are. And then of course, keep in mind that the middle housing lot divisions will allow the middle housing to be placed on its own lot for home ownership purposes in the future. These are parent lot size requirements. Any questions about the lot size? Okay, zooming right along to another fun map. So this one is a new map as well. The map on the left is included in your packet from the published code recommendations, and the map on the right is an option. So let me explain what the differences are in the way that these maps were produced. The Planning Commission had discussed a parking reduction for new middle housing that is near transit. And we had discussed mapping that along frequent transit routes or some other indication like key corridors or a difference between existing service or adopted frequent transit network routes. And that is the key difference between these two maps. So the option on the left, the option 1 map, which is included in the packet and has several kind of sub maps that you can scroll through, and it's mapped at a tax lot specific level. That is based on information from LTD's service planners about where service is currently running at 4 buses an hour. So I'll let you absorb that for a minute. 4 buses an hour is 15-minute frequency, and it does cover most parts of Eugene currently. There's a big gap in some parts of our community, including the whole Coburg Road corridor. And we had some questions about that. So in the process of reviewing this information, staff went back to LTD and our partners at LCOG and asked to produce a map that would show as a basis for the parking reduction incentive, LTD's adopted frequent transit route map from the 2014 Long Range Transit Plan. And that is the basis of option 2, the map on the right. And it does follow our key corridors. I'm almost done, Tiffany. With the addition of Harlow Road and the Martin Luther King area where there's frequent service there. So I'll pause and take some questions about these options. We are very curious because of the amount of discussion we've had already with the Planning Commission about this, what you would like to see. And then of course we have the opportunity to get public input on this as well when we go to the hearing. Commissioner Edwards.
Thanks, Terry. So having a little bit of insight as to how the transit planning process works, I'm just going to share that I would highly, for myself, I'm really strongly in support of the option 1, and I'll tell you why. Because what these processes have not been done well together in the past, where you have, you know, land use, and then you have transportation planning, specifically transit, and where we're going to put routes and things like that. And what makes sense is when you have density and people living along places where you want to put transit. So expansion of transit is really important for this way of thinking. And so as we have more opportunities to increase our frequency in these corridors, which we really are working towards doing at LTD, I do think, and I say that, I apologize because I work for LTD. I do think that the more we can incentivize the density, where not just where we are, but where we want to go, that really helps make the transit piece function well. So that's my spiel, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. But I'm strongly supportive of option 1.
Okay, I'm gonna thank you. I'm gonna go to Ken, but one note before I do, and that is that of course there are different options. You could combine these maps, for example, to cover the most coverage possible. That would be an option as well. Commissioner Beeson.
I'm wanting to think about what Commissioner Edwards said, because I know you're closer to LTD, and I want to understand that. I've been reading as much as I can, I guess, about kind of urban development in relation to frequent transit in communities. I guess my immediate reaction when you put them up there, as you talked about them, Terry, is I wanted to combine them. If in fact option 1 is transit every 15 minutes, which is what I think you said. And option 2, and it doesn't have Coburg Road and Harlow Road in it. So I guess, and then what I think I was hearing on option 2 is that in the longer range plan for LTD, they would have more transit out Coburg Road and more frequent, whether that's EMX or what, I don't know. But so I guess I just would leave it at that. My sense, we need a lot of input from the public. We need to hear what a variety of people think, but I would tend to want to do option 1, but put Coburg Road and Harlow Road on it. So thanks.
Thank you. And let me know if it would be better to stop sharing. I'm feeling like people want to still look at the map, so I'm leaving it up there, but okay. Commissioner Fragola.
So I feel like I'm not understanding the differences between the two maps, because I heard Commissioner Edwards say that it's useful for us to incentivize where transportation is going, where it's going to be developing towards, so that we're increasing density in that way. But I thought that option 2 was the long range plan and option 1 was just what exists currently. So I feel like I'm not understanding the 2 different maps. Could somebody clarify for me, please?
Yeah, I will try. And there's a lot of people that have touched these maps, so I think we're going to have to continue to ask questions about that. But that, how you just summarized it, is how I understand it. And it's in the legend here for option 1, LTD frequent transit network, 4 buses per hour routes. And so those are shown, those are existing service. And then the one on the right is from the adopted, through a LTD board action, the adopted plan for both future and current frequent transit network routes. And they're in slightly different colors. They're kind of hard to see, but the orange ones that go up Highway 99 and up Harlow to Crescent are orange, they're future. So it's a combination of both existing and future adopted. So that is the future vision map for what's in the plan, although it's now 7 years old.
Okay, so I didn't misunderstand the description. Am I wrong in perceiving that the future planning, and Commissioner Edwards, feel free to correct me, does the future plan have less transportation options? No, okay. So I'm just gonna say I liked the idea of option 1 looks like it's a little more extensive, but I liked the idea of some combination going on to give the greatest coverage we can possibly give. Anybody can feel free to provide me with insights. I'm open.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to that, Commissioner Edwards, and then we'll go to Commissioner Fiorelli?
Thank you, Terry. I just want to clarify. Yes, Commissioner Fragola, you're right. And I apologize. I just kind of looked at it at a glance, and to me, it just seemed like a more robust coverage, but you're correct. And I think that essentially what I'm trying to say, and if the solution is more of a hybrid, but I guess essentially what I'm trying to say, and yes, the Coburg Road, Harlow, that whole area is extremely important. I think my point was that I think that it's important for us to be thinking, ahead as to where we want to increase service and transit and, incentivize the density around those areas, because that's what makes sense. And that's what gives us the authority as the transit agency to improve the service around those areas. So I apologize if I was confused. I was. But I think that hopefully my point was taken well.
Thank you for clarifying. It is super confusing, and it's complicated by the fact that there's a long-range transit plan, there's current service, the service is constantly being updated to respond to land use and demand, and our code is a static document. So we're trying to figure out what's the best map to put in our code without having to adopt or amend it all the time. But I'm hearing some support from the Planning Commission to put out an option for public hearing that might combine these options and maximize the coverage of the incentive. Let me know if that's not right. Commissioner Fiorelli.
Thank you. Having a difficulty turning on my microphone there. I'd like to point out a couple of things that I think come to mind, and this gets to our conversation about affordability in particular. When we're thinking about parking reduction, because there is increased transportation, that is of course a benefit to the developer, and it could potentially reduce costs, but that's not necessarily, I think, what we're seeing in a lot of places. I can turn to Portland and other places that are doing things like transportation-oriented development. We see that increasing cost over the long term. My concern is that in these areas, we're reducing parking minimums, and there may not be any mechanism in place to keep those costs from rising. I'm thinking in particular along Franklin and River Road area. I want to point out that I think the local routes, the other routes that we're seeing really on the left quite a bit, are the ones that let people get home with groceries because they don't have a car available to them. I'd like to see more of those within the community. And I understand what we're talking about is really slicing the same pot of money in different ways. Largely, that's what we're talking about here. But I'd like to make sure that we're thinking primarily about affordability, really above anything else, especially when developers see the opportunity to reduce parking and see potentially the increased profitability of that, quite honestly. I'd like to hear thoughts from other commissioners on this consideration as well, if possible.
Great. Well, we have Commissioner Edwards again, and then Commissioner Ramey. No?
Sorry, no, that was an old hand raise. Somebody else can go ahead of me.
Okay, Commissioner Ramey.
I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay. Well, two thoughts. One was, it seems to me that we're stuck with current supply and future projections of where we might be supplying transit. And if we're trying to encourage this kind of development around transit, which I think we all are, we really need to combine those two ideas so that we have a code that reflects not only where we are today, but where we think we might be in the future. And I think several commissioners had said that cast the broadest net. So that's kind of the practical approach. The maybe less practical approach is to build into the code a 5-year review where every 5 years you update this map according to whatever happened with transit planning in the interim. I know that's not the cleanest way to write code, but it might be the way to write something that is more reflective of our reality, which is that these things are going to change over time.
Thank you for that. Before I go to you, Commissioner Isaacson, I just want to put a plug for the rulemaking coming from the state on climate-friendly areas and climate-friendly equitable communities. There is a lot of information about new state requirements that will have cities reducing parking citywide. And so some of that, like a 5-year review, will be after that rulemaking is in place. And it's a great idea, Commissioner Ramey. And we might also already be implementing those statewide rules for reducing our parking requirements to comply with that new state mandate as well. Commissioner Isaacson.
So I guess I had this question. So I'm concerned that designating the transit corridors for middle housing incentive code will result in new middle housing being built and that will have an opportunity cost where we're precluding the envisioned Eugene's goal of situating denser multifamily housing along the same corridors. In other words, if we're building in these corridors, we won't have a multifamily option because we will have incentivized a duplex being built, for example, which will create less density, more cars along these transit corridors. What's staff's thoughts there?
Yeah, there's a lot baked into that question. First off, I would say that the zoning on the corridors themselves tends to be commercial or multifamily zoning, which tends to get built out to a higher density because it's worth more. We're in the process, as you know very well, of deciding what the proposed zoning will be along River Road as the first corridor to upzone from R1 directly on the corridor to a more multifamily designation. So that's the overall community vision, is multifamily and commercial redevelopment concentrated on the corridors. And we already have incentives like SDC reductions for multifamily development that is on basically the same map as option 2 here. So the zoning will control what is allowed where it's R1. I see your point, but I do think that the concern about underbuilding will be counterbalanced by the actual zoning of the property along the corridors.
So with
Anything to add? Any other staff have anything to add to that? Nope. Okay. Commissioner Ramey, do you have another point?
Sorry. Well, again, junior planner here. We're talking about a quarter of a mile. So how many city blocks is a quarter of a mile? 2 or 3?
Depends which neighborhood you're in.
So what we're really talking about is that second and third block out where they might be able to take advantage of middle housing, whereas the first block is still going to be commercial or high density multifamily. So that, to me, that's the distinction, is we're trying to catch that in-between zone that doesn't exist in our code, because we go from R1 to high density or commercial. So we're trying to catch that in-between part, which is really in that outer edge of that quarter mile along these corridors. Although I could
reminded me of something. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you reminded me of something, which is there was a suggestion to expand the buffer to a half mile where there's MX service. And because the research has shown that people are willing to walk a half a mile to an MX station or a bus or a light rail station. So that would be an option as well. We don't have that mapped yet, but that could be something that we could work with LTD and LCOG to produce if there's interest in that. Commissioner Beeson?
Yeah, just very briefly, I would support expanding it. I think we've talked about it before. I wasn't sure. I mean, I don't know if the quarter mile is, anyway, I would support expanding it, and to the extent it became kind of a discussion item, we could also look maybe at a third of a mile. It seems like if we could move it out a bit, I'm thinking of River Road. We mentioned that a few times. The commercial is along the road there, but you start expanding it out to a third or a half a mile, and there is a lot of residential property.
Commissioner Fiorelli.
I'd like to second as well that comment. And thinking about pedestrian catchment areas in general, we typically think about those in a half a mile distance. What we kind of have here is that half a mile with a line split through it, right? And so if you think about a half a mile on either side of the transit corridor, I think that would open up a great deal of opportunity for those residential neighborhoods. And definitely address some of our middle housing and affordability concerns that have really come up recently. I very strongly support that expansion.
Great. Thank you for the discussion on this. This has been really helpful to me and gives me some ideas about options to present to you next time and further work to do with our GIS staff. Thank you. I think I just have a couple more slides. So I'm going to finish the presentation, and then we have, I think, some other items too. So given the late breaking news about the notice in the newspaper and our hearing date, this is what the next steps would look like. And Jeff, feel free to jump in here. We're still trying to line this out and make sure that all of the notice requirements can be met and I's dotted and T's crossed, but we know for sure that we're going for a joint meeting with the Planning Commission on Monday, October 18th, and that is good because it will be before your public hearing regardless, and kind of kick off the next steps in the adoption process. Then we get into your info sessions, not really yours, but the public info sessions, which are already scheduled for October 19th and 21st. We're considering adding one on the 26th. And then, as we discussed earlier, postponing the public hearing until November 16th. That would push your deliberations out until later in November, depending on what's done with the record. So that's why November 23rd is listed as tentative. And then you could have a meeting on the 30th, and we need to poll you for meeting dates in December. And I think that's it. So I can stop sharing and take any questions that we didn't get to. Commissioner Beeson.
So quick question, back on the slide you just had up. I'm trying to remember what you labeled it. Ahead of the November 16th meeting, we're moving the public hearing out there. And then you have a couple of information sessions, which I was thinking are, I just want to clarify what those are. Those are where you're doing the Zoom meetings with people that were with the public, right? And you're thinking of adding a third one of those?
Yeah.
That's what that means, right?
Yes, that's what that means. And Sophie, feel free to give a plug for the info sessions if you would like to.
Let me throw my question in very quickly, and then I just wanted to, so the Planning Commission is meeting tonight. We are talking about this. If I'm following along the way, and I know this is kind of your immediate draft schedule given the breaking news, but we wouldn't really meet again until we have a public hearing on November 16th, at least meet again on middle housing. And then we'd have our deliberation after that. And I guess just as a note, I would think, it's possible we'll need more than 2 meetings on deliberation. I don't know, I'm making a guess there, but so that would just be, we'll have the public hearing on the 16th, and then we'll have multiple meetings after that before we get the recommendation off to council.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a plug for the information sessions. They're an opportunity for anybody to come and learn about the process and ask questions about what's required by House Bill 2001, our public engagement process and the outcomes, and how to get involved with the public hearings process and how the public hearings process works. The presentation will be pre-recorded, and we'll release that on all of our channels. And then afterwards, there will be a live question and answer opportunity. So the first session is next Tuesday from 7 to 8:30. And the next one is the next Thursday, the 21st, from 4 to 5:30. And the time is to be determined on the 26th, since we thought we'd be spending the evening with you. But please spread the word to your networks. Anyone is welcome. And if they're not available to come, all of the information sessions will be recorded and shared. And of course, staff are always available for questions over the phone or email.
Thanks, Sophie. We love late breaking news for this project. It keeps us on our toes. But I do think it's a silver lining that we can add an information session and give people more time to look at our summary information. Commissioner Fragola.
Yeah, so in terms of, all the bells and whistles for public notice, like what do communities do that don't have a local paper?
That is actually a requirement of our code. So yeah.
Does the weekly qualify as a local paper?
Great question, Ryla, and that's, I think, something that we will be investigating. Our code requires publication in a newspaper of general circulation, which is a phrase that's used in state law in a number of places for a number of purposes. And so there is, the the Register Guard is a newspaper of local circulation, but there may be, or I'm sorry, of general circulation in the community, but there may be others as well. The Oregonian, maybe the Weekly. So yeah, that's a conversation that I think we'll be having.
Yeah, okay, because I mean, sometimes I know many of us wonder how much longer the RG is going to survive in this town. And so that is, I think, a consideration that if we're going to be in compliance with public notice requirements and we don't have a local paper, that's something to evaluate seriously.
Commissioner Isaacson?
I was just going to dovetail off that. I believe that that code was also written prior to social media and prior to the internet really being put into place. So if we could have some sort of updated 21st century code for language would probably be a good idea.
Yes. Great. Well, thank you for all of your thoughts and comments tonight. I think we're done with the middle housing item, and we can move on to the next item on the agenda.
Terry, while you're going, I did want to remind, I do have to stop at 7 o'clock. I would have sent it in a chat. We don't have that privately. So if you see me pop off, that's why. My apologies to everyone.
Okay. Thank you. All
Can
right.
I just
So
make one more comment?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Commissioner Chair Beeson. I just wanted to commend staff on all of the exceptional work that you've done, both in continuing to fulfill the vision of the community input, implementing the recommendations that we've made, but also in making this information accessible to the public. I just think the work has been exceptional, so thank you.
Thank you for that. I agree with that. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and move on to agenda item C. I'm going to ask Alyssa if there's items from staff. Alyssa?
Always have something.
Okay.
So first thing I want to start off with is to remind you that on Monday at 5:30 is the joint meeting with the City Council. A little earlier now because it was intended to be in advance of your public hearing of middle housing, and it still is. It's just a smidge earlier than we anticipated. And so as soon as those materials are published, I will send you a copy of the meeting material so you all have that. Just to give you an overview of what we're planning to cover. So Terry and I will be giving the staff presentation, and it's going to be an overview of the role of the Planning Commission, kind of what you've been up to, and then an overview of planning's kind of current active projects and upcoming projects. And then kind of a more of a focus on the middle housing project. Really, the goal is to make sure that both bodies have the same level of understanding regarding public outreach and the adoption process and how people can be involved. Obviously, you all have quite a head start because I'm pretty sure most of those 19 meetings that Sophie mentioned are yours. And so I know that you all are deeply, embedded in all of this, but it's really to help the council get there too, and to have that same level of understanding. One of the attachments that we included was the letter that you provided earlier this year about the public outreach process. And so that was also a piece of it. Terry, was there anything else on that? I know you and I need to huddle a little bit more on that. Anything else you wanted to mention?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Just that it's an opportunity to get together with the council and start it off with a good understanding and the same information for both bodies. I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah. So, thank you. Looking forward to that. And let me know if you have any questions about that. And then next, we are going to be obviously adjusting. We'll be getting a new schedule soon because we won't need all of the November meetings, and for October meeting. So expect a revised schedule as well as a poll from Linda asking you about some additional, and we're probably going to ask you about a lot of dates, just so we don't have to keep sending you doodle polls about upcoming dates. So be on the lookout for that, and we'll probably ask for a pretty quick turnaround on that as well. So thank you in advance. I appreciate that. And then I think you all know that we unfortunately will be having a vacancy next month. And so that's a bummer. I don't have full details on what recruitment is going to look like. I've been working with the city manager's office. It sounds like there could be an option to use the current pool, but the council could also decide to open it back up. And there's advantages either way. The current pool, we could get somebody quicker. Opening it back up, we might be able to get a more diverse pool. So yeah, I will let you know what I hear. I'm actually honestly leaning towards opening it back up because I think it gives us a chance for folks who were involved in this process, whether Healthy Democracy, Equity Panel, or any of the other general public groups and groups that were involved, to put their name in the hat for that. So I will keep you up to date on that. And then also related to vacancy, which means I can't really finish the subcommittee assignments because we have a bit of a hole there. I will maybe give you a draft, and then we can see what's left to fill, and if it makes sense to hold off for the new person or not. And then lastly, tomorrow at noon, there's a city council meeting, a work session on the housing implementation and pipeline, which is a city's 5-year action plan for housing. Everything from serving homeless all the way up through market rate housing. So I sent you a copy of the meeting materials for that. If you get a chance to watch it, I think it might be really helpful to listen to that in advance of Monday's meeting if you can spare the time. I think it would be a good idea. And we have a number of staff in this room, in fact, have been, in this meeting, have been involved in that process as well. So that's all I can think of. So let me know if you have any questions about any of that.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Does anyone have any questions for Alyssa?
Looks like Commissioner Fregula has her hand up.
Oh,
her hand.
Okay.
So well, first of all, Commissioner Fiorelli, I want to say I'm really excited for your opportunity. So congratulations. And even though you've only been with us a short time, I was already appreciating many of the comments that you've made. So you'll be missed. I am curious if it reopens, how much longer that would mean. Is there timelines around how long it would have to be posted? And then, I mean, it seems like it would be a couple of months at least.
And that's something I'm still looking into. And there's also the opportunity to ask the folks who previously applied if they want to be in the new pool. So maybe we open it for a shorter period. I don't know what their parameters are exactly around that or what they've done in past processes. So I'm still looking into that, but that is a good consideration for sure. So you have a lot coming up on your plate over the next 6 months at a minimum.
And I guess I would also recommend that if we're going to be onboarding someone immediately prior to significant decisions around HB 2001, that it might be beneficial to provide some additional support and onboarding. And it also, if it is going to be a long time, I would be supportive of having some type of interim decision around subcommittees that would help us continue to do the work of the board. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Alyssa? Any others? I'm going to figure out on here how to change the color of your hands when you raise them so they stand out on my machine more. Okay. So do we have items from any of the commissioners? Anything else at all? Okay. I guess what I'm going to do is we'll adjourn and we'll see each other again on Monday when we're having our joint session with the council. Thanks very much.